Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Love Fruit podcast. And once again, we have another episode that is filmed in person rather than via Zoom or Skype, which is excellent. We are here in the jungle paradise tropical hideaway of Alice Copilet, and we're here in Koh Phangan, Thailand. And Alice has a lot of people following her on Instagram in particular, and YouTube as well, I believe, and talking about fasting, the raw vegan diet, raw food, fruit, other topics related to health, and I'm interested to learn more about that. Alice, how about you tell us a little bit about you firstly and your story? Is there anything you want to let us know before we get into other questions?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I always love the opportunity to talk about myself. But really, it's been quite a journey. But I would say that really it all kicked off when I was quite young. I've always had this deep inner search within me for truth, for life to be more pleasant and more enjoyable. I've always had this like suffering, I guess, inside me that I've been understanding is there and wanting to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to party a lot and kind of seek that fulfillment and that reflection in that aspect, you know. And also just a lot of it was just kind of consciousness expansion. I really enjoyed experimenting with psychedelics and being in situations where, you know, there's a lot of people hugging and a lot of love and a lot of community. And in many ways, my partying years were just amazing. I felt, you know, kind of really connected, really loved.
Mm-hmm.
Things flowed really well, but invariably there would be a really bad hangover. There would be a really bad come down. My life felt like super dualistic. You know, it was either an amazing high or a super low. And also I realized a few things about myself. For instance, like I used to be very lonely on my own. And I came to realize like, oh, other people aren't quite like me. Other people seem to be very capable to spend a lot of time on their own. Why is it that I need to be with people all the time? And, you know, and you just don't know things about yourself that are unusual until you spot other people and how they interact in their lives. And a lot of other things, for instance, like breakups and relationship drama was always very traumatic for me. I'd always find conflict very difficult. And I definitely found myself relying a lot on various substances. For me, you know, it was red wine and marijuana and I guess kind of cocaine. They were kind of my drugs of choice, depending on the context, but also food, big time. I used to be very like picky about what I ate and how I ate, and I was very like, I eat meat 3 times a day. Like a meal, if it doesn't have meat, it's not a meal.
Oh, wow.
I was obsessed with meat because I come from Eastern European background where meat is just such an essential part of the diet. And if it's not just meat, it's meat and salt and lots of preserved foods and lots of grains and lots of bread and butter and eggs and dairy, and it's just all there. And there's a lot of kind of like everyone sitting around the table and eating together and lots of shaming around you not finishing the plate and lots of your mum made that with love, you can't not eat it, and all this kind of psychological coercion, shame around food. And I was very, very funny and picky with food, and I would often binge. Usually it was kind of related to the weed, but I would smoke marijuana and then just sit, just like, blah, 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 eat loads of food. And afterwards I'd feel really gross, and I never purged. I was never really into the kind of bulimic aspect of things, but I would definitely binge. And then I would just feel really sick, and I'd not eat for a day sometimes, or a day and a half, just because my body was like, oh, you know. So there was this kind of like feast famine, a lot of suppression of emotions with foods, and in the sort of grand context of it as well, my life was quite dualistic in that I used to be a lawyer and I was working in the city in London, and you know, I went to Oxford University and I was this kind of like super intelligent, well-to-do, well-educated, like wearing a suit, and yet I had this complete other like identity where I was party girl, and loads of my friends had no idea that I was even a lawyer in the day. They were all in media or doing creative kind of jobs, and I really didn't feel authentic at all. And I was leading these 2 lives, and neither of them felt like me. And then about 7, maybe even 8 years ago now, I went on a 8 years ago, I went on a Vipassana retreat, and everything really changed from there. I began really observing what I was eating and how I was eating, and within about 9 months of that, I experimented with a 30-day all vegan challenge, and that went super well. I felt amazing physically, but even more so just like emotionally and in my headspace. I felt peace and more clarity, and I was able to sleep better, and I realized a lot of my neurotic behavior just by itself had kind of calmed down, and I wasn't perhaps quite so afraid of being alone, and I felt more connected to myself. And I realized there's something here, and I just never went back. After 30 days of being vegan, I carried on, and I've been vegan, plant-based ever since. And then after about maybe 2-3 months of being on a vegan diet and feeling amazing, I started getting really bad skin problems. Like, I'm talking like rashes on my face, loads of whiteheads, lots of blackheads. It was really traumatic. And that's when I found out about fasting. I started investigating and looking on Google, like, what can you do for bad skin? How, you know, and I had some understanding now. I'd understood about fruitarianism and raw veganism, and I was beginning to learn about all these things on YouTube, and it was such an exciting time for me.
Yeah.
Like, I was suddenly like in this life, and I thought I understood and I knew the world, and suddenly this whole new aspect of the world became open to me, of these people who were eating this amazing, natural, very karmically light lifestyle and diet, and they're all kind of traveling and working for themselves and having YouTube channels, and I thought, like, I want this. I don't want to be in my office like being a lawyer. This sucks, right? And then it was the process of how do I get from A to B. And it involved, you know, it took me in total 6 years. I was a lawyer for 6 years, and I probably, about halfway through that, let's say after three years in, I found out about this lifestyle, and I wanted it, but how do you make it happen? And I was very much addicted to the money that I was making, which I was spending all of.
Oh my God.
You know, on partying and wine and delicious foods and whatever. And then it's like slowly and doing these patterns that were dissipating my energy and learning how to cultivate my energy inwards. And I continued fasting, and actually I never told you about the first fast. So I did this 10-day water fast after about maybe 6 months of being vegan, and it completely cleared away all of my skin problems. They never came back. Obviously I occasionally get some skin problems, but not to that extent. It was like every pore was just dripping, you know, with elimination.
And do you think that, was that because of the vegan diet, or was that like a detoxification kind of thing, or what, do you have any idea of what you think that was, why it came out so much in a vegan diet?
For sure it felt like detox, because you know the skin's one of our main organs of elimination. So it was very normal for me, and I've always eliminated through the skin. Like, I've always been aware that stuff comes out through the pores, and I've always been very careful to keep my pores clean. So to me, it really, like, I knew intuitively the body's eliminating, because almost like every pore on my face, all I had to do was lightly squeeze it and things would come out. And whenever we eliminate anything from the diet, so all I changed was that I eliminated a bunch of stuff from my diet. It's not like I started adding anything new or changing anything up. So really, I just made my diet more simple, more natural, more healthy, less toxic. So obviously the excess toxicity starts to come out. And a lot of it is hormonal, kind of endocrinal stuff, because a lot of the meats and animal products, particularly the dairy, contain a lot of hormones, a lot of endocrine disruptors. So when you stop putting all of that stuff into your body, the body's suddenly in this process where it's kind of like, oh wow, I can start releasing these really deeply embedded poisons and toxins, this various cellular waste that's just been sitting in the body. And even though you're not going to think of a vegan diet as a fast, in a way, if you're looking at it coming from a standard American diet with loads of meat and cheese and dairy and eggs and oils and all of it, it is a fast of sorts. Yeah. So any kind of fasting that we do will result in detox symptoms coming up. Anytime you remove toxins or reduce the toxic load, toxins will start coming up. It's like a science in a way. The body is amazing at always regulating itself, always eliminating. It's always in this process of cleansing itself.
Do you think that some people that might have experienced that, you know, going on a vegan diet, getting all these spots and things, do you think some people would go back to their bad diet? And that I hear people talk about maybe sometimes if you go back to a worse diet, those detoxification symptoms are suppressed.
Exactly. Yeah. Sadly, you hear a lot of this happening. A lot of people for whom the symptoms are too much, and a lot of fear can come up. Right. Because when symptoms come up, we start to doubt the process. Oh, maybe this fruit thing isn't good. Maybe I'm not getting enough protein. which is why it's so important that we educate ourselves properly
Right.
on what's actually happening with the body.
Right.
Because if we don't understand what's happening, and obviously a lot of this understanding is not just from reading books or watching other YouTube channels or whatever, it's about the experience, the direct experience of knowing what your body's showing you and teaching you. And you have to experiment with different things to understand that. If you're always going to eat a certain diet, the body becomes very used to that, and you can live a very normal life, quote unquote, eating a terrible diet, and you're basically killing yourself slowly, but you don't know any different until you stop and try something else.
So after your 10-day fast, and by the way, was that just on your own? Was that at a place? How did that happen?
It was unsupervised. I just did it on my own. I've always been a bit of a lone wolf, I suppose, with these things. Plus, I didn't at the time. I looked into some of the prices for these things, and there isn't anywhere really in London available that you can go and fast. I looked into going to Costa Rica. There's a centre, Lauren Lockman has a centre, and I was looking at that, but you're looking at spending thousands and thousands of pounds.
Sure.
And it just, at the time, I just thought, I'll do it myself. But I did read up a lot about it. I researched a lot about it, and I got a book by Herbert Shelton called The Science and Fine Art of Fasting.
Sure.
Which is a real classic, and as I was fasting, I was reading that.
Right.
So it was really reassuring, and I kind of, as he was talking about things, I could see them actually happening in my body. And I really highly advise people, if they are doing a fast in an unsupervised context, to get the teachings of people who have been there before and have walked the path and can give them advice. I highly recommend this book. Also, Arnold Ehret's books are amazing. The mucus diet healing system and rational fasting, and a lot of the fears that can come up, and it's very normal when we fast or when we change our diet to a lighter, more less dense diet. These fears will come up because it's part of an energy that's suppressed within us, and we don't want this fear to come up, so we eat to suppress it. And then when we stop eating, the fear comes up, and of course it's going to be, I'm hurting myself, I'm damaging my body, maybe my organs, and what about my metabolism? And it's about really understanding all of the fear-mongering that's being spread, whether it's around protein, whether it's around you need to have this and that in your diet, like the vegan diet lacks B12, or all these kinds of things. It's all fear-based stuff, and it's like not understanding really how it works. Like with the B12 thing, once you understand, it's produced inside the gut. It's produced and absorbed inside the gut. So if your guts are full of shit, you're not going to make any B12 and you're not going to absorb any B12, right? So the issue is like way simpler than I have to supplement and inject, and B12 is made in China and transported via Taiwan and is to me in London, and like this is what I need to be a vegan in this modern world. It's like, come on, it's not reality. But fear can make us do so many things because we just go along with what everyone says we should do, and there's so much misinformation on the internet. It's rife with it.
So, and after that fast, did you change your diet more, or did you become aware of more, or what happened after that basically?
It was an interesting process because I was aware of how to break a fast correctly. He talked about it, Herbert Shelton, about breaking it with fruits. So I don't know if you know, but if you're living in London at any point, but you can get these amazing Turkish and Greek watermelons in London.
Sure.
A lot of the Turkish shops stock them. Yeah. So I'd stocked up with watermelons enough for like 3-4 days, and it was great. And I found myself still having really, really bad food cravings. So even though I had all these watermelons to eat and it was just like da-da-da, I went to Planet Organic literally on the first day of breaking my water fast, and I got a raw burger, which is like, full of nuts and seeds and all sorts of things. And my body kind of did surprisingly okay, considering, probably because I didn't just break it with that. I'd had watermelon for a couple of meals. But yeah, I found myself binging a little bit and finding it hard to not become super obsessed with food, as can often happen when you fast, because you've basically pulled out a load of roots. You've gone like, here's all your disordered eating, like da-da-da, and it comes up. And afterwards you have to be very, very present to patterns, because you're much more susceptible to overeating or to eating emotionally or to slipping back into old patterns. And really the body doesn't want a raw burger on the first day of breaking a water fast. It's the mind. It's always the mind. And I definitely went down that. So I kind of yo-yoed a little bit. I did another 10-day water fast about a year later. And by this point, by the time I did the 10-day water fast the second time, I was fully sort of raw vegan. So for a whole year, maybe I'd say about a year and a half into my vegan journey, I was fully raw vegan for a whole year. Bearing in mind I was eating a lot of cacao and a lot of oils.
Oh, wow.
and still quite a lot of salt and gourmet vegan food.
And how long ago was that?
It would have been like, I don't know, 2015 approximately,
okay.
something
Yeah.
like that. And I was still eating a lot of fruit because I love fruit, probably still 50-60% fruit, but still very high fat,
Sure.
a lot of stimulants. I wasn't really that careful with my salt at the time. I
Mhm.
was still using salt very heavily. So after a whole year of this, and to me it was quite challenging because I had to put up with a lot of judgment from people who were still, like I was still working as a lawyer at this point, so we'd go out for team meals, which you have to go to sometimes, and I'd be in the burger restaurant saying like, oh, can I just have a plate of lettuce and tomatoes? And people at my job would just be like, she's weird, like, you know, and having to constantly tell people about this stuff, and people would say like, yeah, but how come you should be looking a bit healthier, like aren't raw vegans meant to be like really skinny? And I was just like, oh god, and it was very difficult for me. So after a year it was like, I thought I'd have all of these amazing I thought I'd look like a supermodel by now, and I'd be living in Thailand, and like, what gives, you know, my life's the same. So it kind of really set me off and put me on another journey of exploring, and I tried the raw till 4 diet for a bit. Put on loads of weight, put on like,
Really?
yeah, put on about 12 kilos in a couple of months.
Wow.
So that's almost 2 stone.
What were you doing? What was that for you, the raw till 4
The raw till
diet?
4. It was basically fruit during the day, which I was kind of largely already doing from my raw vegan diet. But then in the evening, instead of eating more like a higher fat gourmet raw meal, as I used to do, I would have now like a very carbohydrate based cooked vegan meal. But, you know, they were very like heavily emphasizing, like shoving in the carbs, you know, and it was kind of like, I guess they were also coming from a history of disordered eating. And for them, for Freely and Drew around, it's like a serious obsession with exercise. So you obviously need to fuel that exercise. And they were doing like insane amounts of exercise, like hundreds of kilometers of bike riding a day, and like encouraging people to eat like huge bowls of rice. And this is very mucus forming food, rice and pasta and all these kinds of things. And I hadn't eaten any bread for a whole year and any grains or anything. And suddenly here I was eating like half a packet of spaghetti in one sitting, you know?
Right.
And my body very quickly, like within a couple of months, had ballooned. I was really inflamed. I was depressed. I was like, my hormones were all over the place. I lost my libido. I felt really, really terrible. And that's when I kind of had a proper sort of dark night of the soul. Where I was like, why God, you know, I'd been doing this for like, I guess like 2 or 3 years already at this point, and it was just not, I was like, how can it be this hard? It was really, really challenging. And it was then that I very deeply felt the calling, like, you need to fast again, you know? And because of the raw till 4 diet, they'd really put the fear into me of fasting, because they're really like, it's going to ruin your metabolism, it's really dangerous. So I was like, oh, I've ruined my metabolism with this water fasting I've done. And I'd also done a juice cleanse. I think I'd done a 33-day juice cleanse in the year that I was raw vegan. So I was really focusing on the cleansing and always feeling amazing. Whenever I fasted, I felt amazing. It was afterwards, it was kind of, how do I manage the energies created by the fast? How do I not then go into binging afterwards? That was kind of what was tough for me. But yeah, it was then after this kind of dark night of the soul type moment where I was led to fast, and I went into Amazon and was like going to order a book, because that's what I do, you know. It's like being a bookworm, and I knew I wanted to read something as I fasted, and that's when I found the Mucusless Diet Healing System by Arnold Ehret. And that book literally changed my life. Like, I even just now when I talk about it, I got a huge wave of goosebumps, because I remember reading it and it was as if like a pinball. It was like going ping, 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 all these missing pieces of information that I hadn't had. Like I understood this and I understood this and this, but I never knew quite how they connected, and everything was a bit of a mess. He just made everything crystal clear, and I really resonated with him just as a teacher. He's very profound, and what he writes is clearly true. You know, when you just read something and you just know this is true, you don't need science to prove it. Your inner knowing tells you so. So I started following the Mucusless Diet Healing System as a process, and it super worked for me. I followed the transition diet. I guess reasonably late on. I didn't start with eliminating meats and dairy because I didn't need to, but almost right away I completely eliminated all grains, and basically just kind of ate mucus lean meals once or twice a week when I needed to, and then the rest of the time I was pretty much on fruits or salads. And then I moved to Thailand 2 years ago almost now.
And did you quit your job as well?
Yes, did I not mention that?
And how did that go? How did that come?
So I was able to leave my job in 2015, December 2015. And luckily I had my partner at the time, his mum had a house just outside London, and I was able to kind of move in there and not pay any rent. So I left my job and, you know, eventually kind of started doing some online legal work. But for a good 6 months, I just kind of rested. I really needed to. I was so incredibly stressed in my job, and not being able to leave the job felt really tough. It was like one of these psychological blocks in my life that it was very difficult for me. So when I left my job to begin with, I was almost in shock. I was just kind of recovering and went more deeply into my fasting and just kind of really just connected to this kind of leaving behind the party girl lifestyle, quitting my job, moving out of London, and it all happened at once, you know? So suddenly I was living in the countryside, I wasn't partying, I'd quit drinking, I quit all the party drugs, I was eating a very healthy diet and started doing yoga, meditation, some plant medicines, and things really began to shift, you know, like my inner space began to become and feel more and more powerful. And then I did some traveling. I went to India for 6 months on and off. Spent a month in an ashram in India, which was just super life-changing, and understood, you know, a lot of ways in which I was limiting myself and in which my power wasn't encouraged to come out and create, and how I was just keeping myself stuck with lots of limiting beliefs. And after that trip to Asia, after that 6-month trip to Asia, largely of which I was spent in India, I really changed. I kind of was a changed being, and I came back to the UK, and I was back for about a year, and then I kind of really had the itchy feet. Once, like as a fruitarian, once you've been to Asia and you've understood the quality of fruits here and the lifestyle and the weather and the people you meet, it just kind of becomes a no-brainer. And I really knew I wanted to come back and kind of live here full time, and it had been a dream for such a long time. And then finally it happened 2 years ago. And before that, I actually lived in Vilnius in Lithuania, which was really fun. And for the first couple of months, it was like proper winter, and I largely just citrus cleansed. I largely just drank orange juice.
Is that your family background?
No, it was my partner at the time. His wife, his business partner, his wife was Lithuanian, so he was already there, and it just kind of made sense. But I totally wasn't prepared to go into like minus 15 degrees. It's like the opposite of like a fruitarian's ideal kind of environment. But I bought, like, I remember just buying like boxes and boxes of oranges, and I was just largely juicing oranges and eating dates and things like this, and it was fine. And then Eastern Europe, when summer comes, the fruits are amazing. So there was amazing watermelons, amazing stone fruits, amazing berries. So I really had a very, like, for a fruitarian, Vilnius is a good city if you're curious to go. But really, I knew I wanted to be in the tropics, and I was really kind of like pushing my partner a little bit, and he was a bit reluctant. But eventually, we agreed, and we came here, and we moved here together. We broke up about 6 months ago, but he's now in Bali, so he's still loving the tropics.
Well, let's talk about this place, this island, Koh Phangan. But did you come out to anywhere else first, or was this the place you knew you wanted to come?
I knew I wanted to come to Thailand because I'd been here before, and I remember just thinking the fruit here is definitely better than anywhere else I've tried. Bali, I guess, would come in a close second, but there was something about Bali, and I'd already been there twice at this point. I just felt it was very touristy and kind of busy, and a lot of traffic and a lot of pollution. And I wanted something that was a lot more close to nature, where I could actually sort of live in the jungle. And the pace of life is a lot slower, and here that definitely ticks those boxes. Plus, I had a friend from my Ayahuasca circle in London, who, you might know him, Danny Saggers.
What's he called?
Danny Saggers.
Not sure.
He's a DJ on the island. I thought you might know him. He's also a Kambo practitioner. But anyway, he would come back, and every summer I'd see him in London, and he'd be telling me about this amazing magical island in Thailand where all these beautiful things are happening, and there's a beautiful community here. And I remember like daydreaming about it while I was, at my desk as a lawyer. So I always knew that I wanted to live here because Danny had just sold it to me. And everything he said was very true. And
so let's take a little detour there. You mentioned plant medicine, you mentioned ayahuasca and all that stuff. Did that come along with when you started to get into fasting and all this stuff? or was that something you experimented with before? And what do you think? Do you think there are benefits, and also, do you think there are any potential downsides to it?
Great question. For me, I'd experimented with, I mean, I didn't try any super hard drugs like heroin or crack or anything.
Sure.
But aside from that, anything I could get my hands on, I was like, what does this one do? So, I tried mushrooms, I tried LSD, but I'd never had any kind of ceremonial style encounters with the plant medicines. It was always at a festival or with a bunch of friends, and it was kind of all fun and games. And I remember becoming more and more drawn to ayahuasca. I saw this documentary about it, the spirit molecule, and just being very curious about the kind of the consciousness aspect of it all. And it was about a year after I did my first Vipassana course. I guess the ayahuasca came into my field of understanding. Like, I suddenly knew it was a thing. And I remember saying to my partner at the time, I was like, we need to go to Peru, and our next holiday basically was going to be to go to an ayahuasca center and spend a lot of money flying there, and these things aren't cheap, right? So we were kind of beginning to talk about saving some money, and within 2 weeks, maybe even less than that, but anyway, let's say 2 weeks, we were in the UK, in Norfolk, but through some friends from London, we found out about a circle in the UK, and they even had some space for us, and it all just happened really synchronistically. And I think whenever you're energetically ready for something, the universe gives it to you. So as soon as we made the decision, right, we're going to do this, actually it all happened and unfolded very quickly. And the group that I sit with are just I was so blessed to have met them. They hold a really heart-centered, very loving space, very profoundly healing, very much based on the group dynamics of sitting and sharing and processing together and really holding space for each other. And over a couple of years, I did 15 ceremonies in total. And I went super deep, and for me it was profoundly healing to have these really peak experiences that remind you of the truth of the non-dual state of reality. Once you've experienced it, that feeling of just pure bliss emanating from your being and no desire for anything else. I had one ayahuasca ceremony where I was literally just sitting like this, just in stillness, and just not even moving like a micro inch, because I was just everything was perfect as it was. I didn't need to think, I didn't need to move, I didn't need to communicate with anyone, it was just, and I was like that for 5 hours. And that kind of experience is just so deeply nourishing and healing for the soul. And yet, two things really. One, you've got to do it with a really heart-centered and a good shaman in a good circle, because there were lots of dark magicians, shall we say, around who are offering plant medicines to people, even particularly on this island, I would say.
Really?
Kind of like an unintegrated, I've heard of ayahuasca ceremonies even without sharing circles. I've heard of an ayahuasca ceremony on the island where people were still drinking medicine at midnight, and at 2 the ceremony ends and people are driving home on their scooters.
Jeez.
Which to me, I'm going, I couldn't wrap my head around that. And you're in the medicine for hours afterwards. You can't possibly be on a scooter and coming back home. And for me, the whole process involves sharing and listening to other people about their experience. And the sharing circle lasts 3 hours or something in the group that I sit with, and it's a huge aspect of it. It's kind of like the yin and the yang. You've got the journey in the night, and then the sharing the following day, and without either, the process isn't full and complete. So that's that's a really important consideration. The second important consideration is that if we're not careful and we approach these things from the wrong perspective, we can become very addicted to that high of connecting to source and receiving downloads and feeling just everything's great. But then you come back home and it's how do you integrate this into your life? How do you, because very often you can go on a weekend retreat, let's say, or on an ayahuasca retreat where you drink more than once or twice, and you can feel super high, but then you land and then other things come into your field, whether it's temptations, whether it's maybe some toxic relationships in your life, some other habits, and it's about maintaining your integrity. And very often people can give away their power to plant medicines. They think I'm feeling a bit lost, I need to go and do a plant medicine retreat, I need some guidance or something. And it's no, the guidance is inside you always.
Right. And
people very often, they kind of bypass that by thinking they need the medicine, and it just becomes this other way of projecting and externalizing healing. So it's not something I have to do because that's a bit too much
Right,
related.
right.
Like it's a bit too much responsibility. I pass it on to the medicine or the shaman
Right, I
or
see,
the
I see.
you know.
So that's cool. Yeah, the only reason I brought that up, I do feel like sometimes you can bump into people and you feel like they've maybe done it a little bit too much or something, or maybe it wasn't, maybe it's not plant medicine, but they've done something a bit too much. Right?
Because
You just
it's
get
very
that
taxing
feeling.
on the central nervous system,
Right.
right? It's not something like this kind of healing doesn't just come for free. There's always a karmic
Okay.
exchange.
Interesting.
So when you're having this huge amount of DMT being released from your pineal gland and you're having like extra multidimensional experiences, like the physical body pays for this in a way. Like the central nervous
Interesting.
system is receiving a big, like it gets fried basically, right? It's like being like hugely flooded with all sorts of different chemicals created by the body, and obviously the external DMT or other whatever psychoactive medicine is involved. So if you overdo it, you can have adrenal fatigue, you can have all sorts of burnouts. And also on a kind of a spiritual level, if you're looking at it from a more purist angle, if you're looking at it more from the yoga angle, for instance, my yoga teacher always is very adamant that we don't need plant medicines, that they are unnecessary, and if anything they're more harmful than good, because more often than not it like forces a kundalini awakening experience.
Okay.
Rather than just you do the practices gently, that door is opened, and then exactly when the time is right you have your mystical experiences, you have your kundalini awakening, and then it happens without this huge stress on the
Right.
central nervous system.
Right.
But the ego comes in, and it's often based on these false beliefs like I'm broken, I'm wounded, I
Right.
need healing.
Right.
So and I need healing now, I need to
Right.
reach the end destination tomorrow. So we seek ways to kind of fast forward the process. And a lot of people, I think, look at plant medicines as one of these things to fast forward the process.
Yeah, and I almost feel like a couple of times I've known people that they've went all the way to Peru or whatever or something, and they do the plant ceremony, and you say, well, what happened? And they said, well, the ayahuasca, whatever, the spirit of ayahuasca, they kind of told me, you know what you're meant to do, just go and do it. And it's like, yeah, I probably didn't really need this. I was just holding myself back from doing what I knew I had to do.
Absolutely.
It's kind of interesting. But okay, that's some good information. We were talking about fasting. You did the 10-day fast. You've after the Russell 4 thing, you'd gained some weight. Did you go? What did you do after that? The mucusless diet after that. Is that kind of what you still practice now? Do you feel like that's kind of the foundation of what you do?
Basically, yeah.
Cool.
For me, since I discovered, so it would have been at the spring, summer 2016 is when I read the
Right,
mucusless
yeah,
diet healing
yeah.
system, and I started incorporating it. And December 2016 is when I spent that month at the ashram in India that I mentioned earlier, where it was very transformational. So really, in about 6 months, I would say I lost most of the excess weight that I put on during the Roto 4 experiment, but there was still some